Now, I have introduced Lisa over the events of the last 8 years several times. She has several books. Here's 3 things about Lisa. She's a teacher, York Region District School Board, 3rd grade. She is a mother, and she is an author. She is quite prolific, and every year I look forward to the books that she has. I'm going to give you her bibliography. Keeping It Real, in no particular order. Independent Reading Inside the Box. The Right Voice. The Right Beginning. Guided Listening was the first one. Guided Listening. And today we're celebrating the birth of her new book, which just came out on Thursday or Friday, 100 Minutes. So we moved from 18 minutes to 100 minutes. It's an amazing math lesson, because Lisa's going to show you how to do 100 minutes in 30 minutes. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Larry. Hi, everybody. Before I just get started, if anybody is a Twitterer, I am a Twitter user, and I have been tweeting this morning. If anybody wants to join me in the Twitterverse after, the hashtag I'm using is WINL, What's New in Literacy, 2012. So I've been tweeting this morning, and you can join me there, and we can continue the conversation. Yes, 100 minutes in 30. So this book that I wrote is the response to the question that I get asked the most. How do you fit it all in? So as Larry mentioned, I have written 5 previous books that each focus on a different aspect of literacy. And this book is the putting it all together. How do you do it in 100 minutes in a way that is meaningful, purposeful, authentic, and you can keep your sanity? So, what fits under the literacy umbrella? There's a lot that goes under there. I'm going to start with a little bit of a personal confession of how I spent my first 100 minutes. I've been teaching for 16 years now. When I first graduated, I stared every night at that 100-minute literacy block on my day plans. I had no idea how to entertain these little darlings for 100 minutes, 500 minutes a week. I knew that I needed to teach kids to read, write, spell, and grammar. Those were the basics that I knew about when I first started teaching. I filled my time with reading activities, worksheets, spelling units, and independent writing. I knew kids needed to write, but I didn't quite know exactly how to organize all that. I knew the writing process had 5 steps. I knew kids needed to draft, pre-write, draft, revise, edit, publish, but I didn't know what to do with all that time, and I didn't know what to do with the immense lineup of children that formed at my desk on the day I was editing everybody's work. I had a beginning understanding of differentiation. I thought that by giving my kids a pretest every Monday for spelling, and the kids that scored perfect on that, you got the enrichment activity of learning even more words. I had a beginning idea of assessment, diagnostic assessment, but I really didn't know what to do with that. I knew I needed to monitor kids' reading comprehension, but I didn't know how. Then along came something called balanced literacy. Now, my 100 minutes is already full of all this stuff, and along comes balanced literacy. And I am supposed to work with a group of small kids at a small table while total anarchy breaks out in my classroom? How am I supposed to do that? Guided reading? What is this? What is everybody else doing? Balanced literacy, modeling reading, modeling writing, shared reading, writing, guided writing. Is there such a thing? Independent reading, independent writing. I am out of minutes. And yet came more. Assessment 4, as and of learning. Holy geez. The new literacies, I didn't even know what these were. Media literacy, digital literacy, critical literacy, social literacy. Where does this fit in my 100 minutes? Descriptive feedback, learning targets, success criteria. I am bulging. Kids are staying in for recess because I need to give them important feedback. Higher order thinking, accountable talk about what? Build in choice, voice. Make sure they're engaged at the end of all of this. I want kids to evaluate. I want them to integrate. I want them to consolidate all in 100 minutes. I stared every night at my shrinking 100-minute block. How do I fit it all in? My literacy block was full. Do you feel like that? It doesn't stop. It keeps coming at us. Let's get rid of all of this. What are the 3 important elements in literacy instruction? Let's break it down to the basics. 3 things we need to do in a literacy block on a daily basis in 100 minutes. We need a time when we can teach kids about reading. We need a time set aside for direct instruction in reading. Whole class direct instruction. We need a time set aside for whole class direct instruction in writing. We need to be teaching these kids these fundamentals every day. And in that middle, we need a time when kids can apply, practice, and share their learning. If we take 100 minutes and we break it into 3 distinct sections, we can do all of those things in a way that is practical, purposeful, authentic, meaningful, engaging, involving choice, voice, all of those things for our learners. Let's take a quick look at all of them. As I said, 100 minutes and 30 is going to be tight, so hang on, here we go. Let's take a look at the direct instruction time in reading. What are we going to accomplish during this time? I have loved the examples this morning about how we get our kids thinking about reading. This is a time when we are going to be modeling reading to our kids. We're going to talk to them about how do you choose a text? When do you abandon a text? I didn't know I could abandon a text until I was in university. I thought if I picked it, I had to read it. Tough it out. Fluency, expression, reading with passion and purpose. Teaching kids about different text forms. What is a text? Does it have to be a book? Can it be a website? We're going to teach kids about thinking strategies. I loved how Bob worked through all of those comprehension strategies as he was working his way through an oral narrative. Brilliant. He had us all thinking about what's going on in our head. Laurie talks about talking to your brain. I love it. What are you talking to your brain about? What is your brain telling you? This is a time where we can build in higher order thinking for our kids. We can be posing questions to them that generate higher order thinking. If we want our kids to be thinking in a higher level, we need to be asking them to state a choice and then justify and defend their opinion. That's what higher level thinking is. State an opinion and then dig for evidence, prove, justify. Critical literacy. Who created this text? What is their bias? What's their intention? How can you validate? Learning how to pose higher order questions is difficult. It's not something easy. It doesn't come naturally to us. So here's a couple examples of how you can change something from a surface level question to a higher level question. So instead of saying, why did the main character cheat on his test? You could say, do you ever think it's okay to cheat on a test? Kids are all of a sudden going to be put in a conflict position where they need to state their opinion and then justify or defend, dig for evidence. Instead of saying, how did the main character feel at the end? He was happy. You could say, how do you know the main character learned an important lesson through the book? I'm asking kids to go back, defend. This is a time in your classroom that you can build in accountable talk. Talk is so important for learners to be able to think and share and make the learning their own. I did a lot of work last year with our school about how to target higher order thinking through talk and talk partners. This is a time when you can be building this into your literacy time. Responding to reading, we need to be explicitly teaching kids how do we want them to respond. Laurie was talking about must-do tasks after guided reading. Well, what are some of those tasks that we want our kids to do? How are they going to be responding to reading? We may have them responding in writing. We may have them responding in all different ways. But this is a time that you can build this into your class lessons so that as kids go off to work independently, they know what's expected of them. If we look at our literacy block in 3 chunks of time, if we designate the first chunk of time, 20 to 30 minutes, to direct instruction in reading, This is a time when you could be doing modeled reading, shared reading, accountable talk, higher order thinking, introducing kids to a variety of text forms, teaching them about media, teaching them about critical literacy, all in one time. Before I go any further, just really, really important to know about 100 Minutes is 100 Minutes was written with a very flexible framework in mind. So this is, you'll see ideas of time frames that might work for your learners. I'm a teacher, so what I do in my classroom may be different than what works for your kids. So it's a framework, it's a whole bunch of suggestions. Take it and modify it. Use it what will work for your kids and your learners. Let's look at the other block of time. I have bookended the 100-minute literacy blocks with 2 times for direct instruction. So starting at the beginning with direct instruction for reading, then they go into a time for application, and then come back together for a time for direct instruction in writing. It's a nice flow. It keeps kids moving. During direct instruction time in writing, this is a time when you, again, are modeling writing. You're teaching kids about the craft, the forms, the process. You can be teaching grammar lessons, teaching them about conventions, strategies, how to write with voice, how to understand an audience, teaching them about passion and purpose for writing. Kids, you need to teach them that you love writing, that you love reading, because we are not only modeling the actual reading and writing, we are the model. Do we love reading? Do we love writing? What we show our kids will become what they believe. This is a time when you can look at examining mentor texts. Hey guys, here are 4 different pieces of writing. You put them in order. Which one do you think is the strongest sample? Which one do you think is the weakest sample? Why? What made the strongest sample strong? What does the strong ones have that the weak ones don't? If you took the weak samples, what would you do to change them, to make them stronger? This is when you can be setting learning targets with your kids, talking about success criteria. You can be using student exemplars, mentor texts, published pieces of work, and looking at what makes these pieces good pieces of writing. How can you do this in your own writing? This is a time when you can teach kids about brainstorming, organizing, and combining ideas. This is from my classroom a couple days ago. So we were looking at, on the chart, I don't know if you can see on the chart. The chart is just a web of ideas, and then we prioritized our ideas, and on the smartboard we have written a paragraph organizing our ideas in a sequence that makes sense. We need to teach kids that thinking is messy, and that's okay. I have a bulletin board right now with all my kids' work that is thinking is messy, and it shows all of them working through process, because that's what it looks like. I wish I'd brought it. I have one of my books, Keeping It Real. When I first wrote that book, it was just an explosion of ideas in my brain, and the entire book, the entire content of a book is on the back of a manila envelope, because it was all I could find in my house to start writing all these things down. And if you looked at the table of contents, that is the book. I wrote it in about 30 minutes on the back of a piece of paper. I just had to just get it all out, and thinking is messy, and that's okay. We need to teach our kids that that's part of the process, that writing doesn't come out absolutely perfect in multicolored markers with wavy lines underneath. Sometimes we have to search for those ideas, search for the right words, and be excited when we find them. This is a time when you can create rich, authentic writing tasks with your kids. You can teach them about finding inspiration so that when they need to write, they know they have ideas of where to start. You can create an artifact box in your class with your kids. Bring in all sorts of random objects, things that inspire them to tell stories. A key, a map, a lost pet poster, a torn soccer jersey. What stories do these tell? Okay, what stories are the kids going to find in them? Pictures. I have a playlist on an iPod for kids to listen to. Musical inspiration. All these different sources of inspiration. Writing prompts. Where can kids find inspiration so when it's time to write, they have ideas? My kids keep an idea pack in the back of their writing books. They just jot down ideas so that when it's time to write, they have stuff to write about. This is a time when you can teach kids about how to share and give feedback. We can become a community of writers where we share our ideas. We value each other's ideas. We honestly believe in working together, collaboration, to help each other to become better writers. You have to teach kids that. So going back to our framework, If in 100 minutes we start our 100-minute block with some direct instruction in reading, and at the end, we end with direct instruction in writing, and I hope by direct instruction you understand I don't mean me standing talking to them. So it's activities that we're doing together. It's learning that's happening in the whole class. So direct instruction in writing could be modeled writing, could be looking at mentor texts, it could be looking at exemplars, looking at different forms of texts, considering various audiences and purposes for writing, and coming up with inspiration writing ideas. That leaves the middle block, the hard part. This is the time when we want kids to apply, practice, and share their learning. And Lori gave us some wonderful, wonderful ideas about how to make an 18-minute guided reading lesson the most purposeful time that you spend with those learners, which fits perfectly, Lori, because I allow 2 20-minute blocks of time. So that works perfectly. You have 18 minutes with guided reading lesson and 2 minutes for transition. So that works so well. We got our math down pat. So my question becomes not what are you doing in the guided reading and the writing conferences, but what is everybody else doing? And this has become a challenge for me. I remember years ago staring at a planning board, trying to figure out what everybody else is doing while I am doing guided reading and writing conferences. How am I going to make sure that the tasks my kids are doing are not just busy work? I started thinking and really critically evaluating my practice. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? Is it the best way to teach kids? I had lots of questions. I asked myself, are the students engaged or are they busy? I asked myself, how can I build in authentic opportunities for sharing an assessment? I don't want to be taking tons of stuff home. Is that authentic when I'm giving kids written feedback 3 weeks or 2, whatever, after they've written it? How can I make that more authentic and purposeful for my learners? How can I provide opportunities to include higher order thinking in their independent work? When they're working on their own, how can I make sure that they are still thinking at that higher level? How can I start building in digital tools and media in purposeful ways? I don't want my technology to just be really, really, really expensive tape recorders that they listen to books on. What are they doing with this media and technology that is purposeful and integrated into their learning? Then I started to wonder about all of these tasks, and is there a way that I can connect them in a meaningful way to build a cycle of learning so that it's not an isolated instance when they meet with me for guided reading or writing conference and then totter off to do something independent on their own? How can I create a cycle of learning so that all of their learning experiences in the classroom, whether they are in a whole group, a small group, working on their own, or working with their peer, is directly and intentionally connected to their learning? Did it go to the next one? Oh, and how can I help my students to create individual learning goals? Man, I had 32 kids in my class last year. Individual learning goals? You gotta be out of your mind. How can I do that? How can I help them monitor, track, assess, reflect, continue to set new learning goals? And how can I keep my sanity? I had to start shifting my thinking. The way I did it before was not going to work. I saw this video. I'm sorry, I tried to clean it up, but there's a few pop-ups on it. I'll try to get rid of them as soon as they come up, but they're not inappropriate. They just ads. This got me really thinking.
So, I learned a new trick yesterday.
You hear it?
And it really blew my mind. Because I've been eating bananas forever, and I would always try to open it from the stem, like dig my finger in, bite it, get that nice taste of banana in your mouth. But then, a friend of mine, Brittany, saw me like struggling with it yesterday and showed me how monkeys open a banana. And you don't open it from the stem, just kind of pinch the tip, it'll split, and you peel it out like that. My whole adult life, I never knew the right way to open a banana, and now you do too.
Anybody actually open a banana that way? There are bananas on your tables if you want to try them. So the banana illustration is less about bananas and more about rethinking things. It's more about thinking about, why do we do the things we do? Is it because it's what we've always done? Is it because it's the way we know? Is it because it's the way somebody told us to do something long ago? Is it the way that everybody else does it down the hall? Or is it best practice? Is there a way that's perhaps a different way of thinking about something? When I started looking at my cycle of learning, the things that kids are doing independently while I am teaching guided reading or writing conferences, I had to be honest with myself. And I had to say, perhaps there's a better way. I started thinking of all of the tasks that I asked kids to do independently. Instead of them being isolated, I wanted to think of them as part of a learning cycle. I wanted my cycle to start. So we have the instruction that happens during your direct instruction time in reading. But like Lori talks about how important your guided reading session time is with your kids. This is when you're working with specific groups of kids on specific learning targets for that group of kids. So this is when you are doing your most important teaching to your learners. This is when I'm going to target specific needs for my kids and I'm going to be teaching them something directly. So I want to start with guided reading. The next thing I want to think about in my cycle of learning is Lori calls them must-dos. I call them reading responses. So what are you taking away from this reading that we did together that is going to show me that you're continuing your thinking about the text that we read together? That makes sense for me. You've met with me for guided reading. I've taught you something. Now I want you to go off and try it on your own. But the cycle doesn't stop there, because I want kids to now take something that I have taught them. They've tried on their own because I've scaffolded for them. And now I need them to start applying it to their independent reading, because I need to see if the things that I'm teaching them are starting to transfer in meaningful ways. But it doesn't end there. I need to know, are you applying the things that I've taught you? And this is a chance when you can build in another opportunity to track what those kids are reading, what they are thinking. But it doesn't end there. So now I need these kids to bring that back to their guided reading table, so when I meet with them again, the cycle is complete. I can see, what have you learned? What have you tried? What do we still need to work on? What do I need to teach you next? This is a cycle of learning that makes sense to me, so that the things that the kids are doing when they are working independently, when they are working on their independent reading, they are thinking about the learning that took place during guided reading. When they are working on reading responses or must-do tasks, they are thinking about the learning that took place during guided reading. They're applying, integrating, practicing, synthesizing. Then I started thinking about the writing cycle. Well, I want to build in writing conferences to meet with kids. I do not like the line of 32 children standing at my desk waiting for me to write on their work. Not only is it exhausting, it is meaningless. When I write on kids' work, they don't learn anything, and I get frustrated. So I want writing conferences to be about them. I want them to be able to share their writing. What's your goal? What are you working on as a writer? How do you think you've done that? I want them monitoring their work, but I can't meet with them until they've written something. So let's start their cycle with independent writing. You got to write something first so we can talk about it. So if they start their cycle with independent writing, how amazing would it be if kids wrote for 20 minutes and then immediately following that 20 minutes, they brought their writing to a writing conference. And they could say, I just wrote this. What do you think? I'm working on writing with description. Or I'm working on putting a period in my sentences. How'd I do? Wouldn't that be amazing if you could build that into your day? so that kids can intentionally meet for immediate feedback following their independent writing? Coming out of a writing conference, we're going to talk about what are you working on? What are your goals? How are you going to continue to do that? Well, now I need to see that you're going to continue to apply and practice those things. So now kids are coming out of a writing conference with a new goal. Perhaps it's a new goal. Perhaps they've refined their goal. And now they need time to practice and apply it. So instead of thinking about independent writing as something isolated, how can it be intentionally connected to the learning that is happening when they are sitting at the table with me? Building a community of writers is important. So after independent writing, this is a time when kids can get together and they can share with their peers. Here's my goal. Here's what I'm working on. Here's my writing. I think I really worked on my goal. What do you think? Can you give me some feedback? So they are learning how to be a community of writers. The other thing coming out of writing conference is word skills. I believe in authentic learning experiences for my kids. I want the words that they are using and learning to be the ones that they are practicing and applying. I don't want to give them random lists of spelling words anymore. That's not practical. It's not purposeful. I want them to use the words that they are using and learn how to use them more effectively. The cycle needs to be complete. So once again, we start back with independent writing, working on something new, coming to share, getting feedback from a teacher, continuing to apply that cycle, and then having an opportunity to share. This cycle makes sense. It's different. It's opening a banana upside down. It's no longer thinking about the things that the kids are doing on their own as independent busy work to get them away from me so that I can do independent reading, guided reading or writing conference. It's completing that cycle so that the independent work that they are doing is intentionally and directly connected to the learning that is happening elsewhere. Now, before you lose your sanity, it is actually very easy to do. I call it award time, applying writing and reading daily, because that's what we want them to do. In award time, these are the tasks, and I think you have a black line master. So independent reading, independent writing, guided reading, writing conference, reading response, peer sharing, word skills, and of course, tech time, which we will touch on later. Let's look at practicality. So I'm in a classroom, and I have 5 groups of kids. Each spot down represents a different group of kids. Each spot across represents a first I will do, then I will do. So imagine that during your award time, you have 2 tasks that students are going to complete. Okay, fair enough? 2 blocks of 20 minutes. If you have younger learners, you might want to shorten that up because their attention span is shorter. So let's say on day 1, I meet with group 1. I meet with them for guided reading. Following guided reading, they're going to totter off and work on a reading response. That's their day. So I've had an opportunity to teach them something explicit in guided reading, and off they go to apply it. The next day, I won't meet with group 1. So I have a chance to meet with group 2. What I did is I just slid it down. Okay, so guided reading is now I'm going to meet with group 2, and they're going to go do a reading response. But group 1, who met with me yesterday, their reading cycle is going to be complete. So they have met with me for guided reading. They have done a reading response. The next day, they're not going to meet with me because now they are practicing and applying independently. They're going to do independent reading and then a reading response. Group 1 has finished the reading cycle. Group 1 is now ready to move on to the writing cycle. Whoops. So before I can meet with them, they have to write something. So they're going to start their day with independent writing. And this gives them a good jump start, 20 minutes or so, to have something written. And after their independent writing, they're going to bring it and have a writing conference with me. Where does that put me? That puts me doing guided reading with group 3 for 20 minutes, 18 minutes, sorry, Lori. And then I have time to do a writing conference. All of a sudden, the time I'm spending with my kids is intentionally directly connected to the learning that they are doing independently. Group 1 is now halfway through the writing cycle. They're leaving the writing conference with a learning goal to work on. The next day, what are they going to do? They're going to work on that goal. So they're going to do independent writing, and then they're going to have an opportunity to do peer sharing or word skills. Okay. That puts me doing guided reading with group 4 and a writing conference with group 2. Finally, integrating tech time. I give the kids the whole block of award time to make sure that they have enough time to sink their teeth into something that they're doing, whether it be media, technology, whatever they are doing. Okay. I know we have kids who are at risk, so we need to make sure that we are building in time at the end to check in with our struggling kids. Sometimes I check in between sessions, sometimes I check in with them at the end. I try and meet with my at-risk kids. On the days that I'm not meeting with them, I'll check in with them for 5 minutes at the end just to say, what are you reading, what are you doing, how's it going? Have a check-in time with them. So technology, just wrapping it up really quickly. Weaving in technology, we want to make sure that the time the kids spend in technology has intentional connections. We want to connect to reading. If you do not know the website Teaching Kids News, write this down. This is the most brilliant website on the internet today. Teaching Kids News is a website that is published daily by 2 educators in Toronto and a journalist, and it has current relevant news articles for kids in all different world events, whatever's happening in the world. But brilliant, brilliant, brilliant in this. At the bottom of each article are curriculum connections, writing links, and reading response questions for kids. Brilliant. Connections to writing, there's all different things you can do with kids. This is just an example of a blog. So during that tech time, kids could be working on blogs, they could be working on Moodles, they could be doing all different things, integrating that tech time so that the time that they are spending is meaningful and connected to the learning that is happening elsewhere. This is a time when you can teach kids to be critically literate. If you don't know the website, thedogisland.com, it is a website that has doggy vacations, that your dog can go on vacations. There's facts, there's testimonials, there's even pictures, but it's a fraud. It's wonderful to get the kids exploring it. How can you validate? How can you check? How do you know it's real on the internet? Getting kids to connect through collaboration. This is a couple things I'm doing with Twitter. Just tweeting with my kids' favorite authors, sharing with them what's going on. The authors tweet us back. The kids love it. Oh my gosh, they're a real person behind those words. This is, in the very front, is a Twitter stream from my classroom. We have a class Twitter handle this year, so I've asked my parents to become flies on my wall. We tweet every day the learning that's happening so that kids, when they go home, they can have conversation with their parents about what'd you learn today? Oh, I saw that you read this book, that's really interesting. Or how did you solve that math problem? Okay, I have pictures, all the things that we are learning. I do it, I have the kids, they have a media role that's, media relations, sorry, and their job is to tweet for the day. So we tweet on our class Twitter handle. Not all of my parents are on Twitter, so every month I print the Twitter feed and I send it home. Putting it together, 100 minutes. If we start our block with some direct instruction time, modeled reading, accountable talk, higher order thinking, teaching them about different text forms, media, critical literacy. Build in time for kids to apply writing and reading on a daily basis. Make sure that cycle of learning is intentional and connecting all of those dots for those kiddies so that they're not just staying busy for 40 minutes of their day. And then ending with some direct instruction in writing, some time when you can explicitly teach kids all the things that we want them to know about text forms, audience, modeling, success criteria, learning targets, all of those things we can build in. How are you going to peel your bananas? If you want to continue the conversation, I'm easy to find. I'm on Twitter, Lisa_Donohue, and that's my blog. Thanks.